Hello, and welcome, and thank you for joining today's MIT Open Learning online interactive salon. I'm Yvonne Ng, and I'm the Annual Giving and Donor Relations Officer for MIT Open Learning. And today we're going to learn about a research study that centers on what the situation was like for MIT faculty and students who transitioned abruptly from the physical classroom to online teaching due to the pandemic. This research was sponsored by the Michelson 20MM Foundation, and we're very grateful for their support. We'll hear from Professor Shigeru Miyagawa, who is a Senior Associate Dean for Open Learning and Professor of Linguistics at MIT. He was on the original MIT committee that proposed OpenCourseWare and has served as the chair of the MIT OpenCourseWare Faculty Advisory Committee. He is also the co-director of Visualizing Cultures with the Pulitzer Prize-winning historian John Dower. He co-created Visualizing Japan, a MOOC offered by edX for the first time in the fall of 2014 that has attracted over 9,000 learners worldwide. He's also served as the project professor and director of online education for the University of Tokyo as a joint appointment with MIT. Megan Perdue will also share the research findings today. She is a digital learning fellow in the Digital Learning Lab at MITx. She produces high quality educational content in courses that push the boundaries of online education. She works with MIT faculty to create online courses and digital learning tools and researches best practices in online pedagogy. She's also engaged in research and consulting projects that seek to understand how online education is changing the landscape of workforce training and lifelong learning, and what are the emerging best practices in online and blended learning at scale. You can find several of the courses she helped develop on edX, including Qualitative Research Methods, Shaping Work of the Future, Tools for Academic Engagement with Public Policy, and Democracy and Development, Perspectives from Africa. And so there are a couple of notes before we begin. The salon is being recorded and will be shared with the open learning community. Your participation today indicates your willingness to share your likeness and any comments you make in this recording. And to ask a question, please either use the raise hand feature or type it into the chat box and we'll queue it up for the speakers. Now, without further ado, Professor Miyagawa and Megan Perdue.
Thank you, Yvonne. Hello, thank you for joining us. So nice to see all of you. Thank you so much for your support of MIT. We are very grateful for your generosity, and we look forward to continuing and deepening our relationship with you. And this kind of salon is one way in which MIT sort of reaches out to people who have been very generous with MIT yourselves, and to tell you something about MIT and see if there's anything that might be of interest to you. Since it's a small group, I think we can keep it informal. I have a short presentation that I will do, and that will be followed by my colleague, Megan Perdue. Yolanda just joined us. Hello, Yolanda. We're just now starting. Okay. So nice to see you. Yep. So let me just speak for a few minutes. And again, it's such a small group that I think if you like to ask questions along the way, that would be fine. Okay. So as Yvonne said, I'm a Senior Associate Dean in Open Learning and also Professor of Linguistics. I've been at MIT for a while. You can tell how long because behind me, I don't know if you can see, you see the rocking chair, okay? You get one of those after 25 years of service at MIT. They give you an option of a rocking chair, another kind of chair, or watch. I know of no one who has chosen anything other than the rocking chair. So, so that shows how long I have been at MIT. I've been here for a little bit more than 25 years. So I came here as a professor of linguistics, but at in year 2000, I had an opportunity to serve on a small faculty committee that that Chuck Vest, then president of MIT, put together, and that turned into OpenCourseWare committee. We proposed OpenCourseWare. Yeah. And I'd like to go back to that because there's something that is important about that experience and also the experience that we just had of just abruptly going online in March because of the pandemic. And so in March, all of MIT and something like 1,200 spring semester courses were thrown online without much preparation in order to keep the spring semester going. And I was really curious to see what the experience was like, first for faculty, but eventually for students as well. So just on a lark, I began to interview colleagues, first in SHAS, but then I started to expand once I asked Megan to come on board and help with this project. I didn't have anything in mind at the time other than to try to understand what was going on. I had a couple of things in mind from my experience of having so helped to launch OpenCourseWare. And that is this, two things. When something big happens, there are a couple of things that you see. One is you see core values of MIT emerging. Okay? Core values of MIT are always there. They're guiding us. Okay? But you don't see it on the surface so much. But in times of great events like the pandemic and OpenCourseWare, you actually see it surface. And so I wanted to see if there's anything about going online in the pandemic that I could observe. The second thing that you see in these extraordinary times is leadership. Okay? MIT leadership is, I mean, in my mind, is my own experience is that it's really a strength of MIT, just an extraordinary strength. Often you don't see it, on a day-to-day basis as a faculty member or a student. In fact, you don't want to see it on an everyday basis. But in times of great need, you see leadership getting exerted. And so I wanted to see if those two things, core value and leadership, if I could see that emerging in time of the pandemic and going online. And so I started to interview faculty members. I ended up interviewing with Megan around 30 faculty members. Also, the Office of Institutional Research did a big survey of faculty and students right after the semester. And so Megan and I sifted through the two surveys by the faculty and the students to see what we could find. By the way, all of this, as Yvonne said, was supported in part by a very generous gift from Michelson 20mm Foundation, represented by Ryan here. So Ryan, thank you so much for your generosity. As I started to speak to the faculty, and as we started to sift through the faculty survey, many things popped out, but there was one that popped out that really surprised me. Really, it was completely unexpected. And that is the following. Okay? Faculty after faculty after faculty talked about how this sudden transition to online education got them really thinking about teaching. That there was this newfound interest in teaching in ways that we have not seen before. Okay? And that sort of both interested me, also puzzled me of all the things that you would expect faculty to talk about. Oh, it was an awful experience. It was so overwhelming. But the thing that really struck us was this idea of teaching. And so once I realized that, I started to ask, Megan and I started to ask faculty, why is there this keen interest in teaching? And a faculty member pointed out that in-class teaching, we know, or we think we know how to teach because we've been taught that way as students. But once we went online, there was no previous experience to fall back on. So we had to kind of really think about how to do this from scratch and figure out for ourselves what works, what doesn't work. Okay. And once the faculty started to think in those terms, then they started to question some of the things, many things that we have been doing without really thinking about it. For example, midterm and final exams, these high risk, pressure packed events. A lot of faculty members began to move away from that, and they started to think more in terms of a weekly grading, which allowed faculty to interact more with the students, so that they can be talking about, evaluating students on a regular basis, as opposed to these big bang exams. Other faculty members started to move away from these non-interactive, one-way monologue lectures, which we are all used to doing. And instead, they started to be much more interactive with shorter lectures. And many uh, kinds of innovations. There, what I saw, I talked about core value. I saw that in that the idea, the MIT core value of innovation, okay, and creativity. Okay? Innovation is part of our core. Okay, we live by it. Okay, and we're thinking about innovation on a regular basis, but we often think of innovation in terms of our research, but not so much in terms of our teaching up to now. But with this sudden transition, we saw that value of innovation uh, surface to the top, and many faculty were engaged with innovation. Okay? And I mentioned some, and I'm sure Megan will have other examples as well. The other thing that we saw in the surveys was appreciation of MIT leadership, how the administration was very nimble in preparing the faculty to go online. We're actually very lucky. And I will tell you that Megan actually had a lot to do with the fact that MIT had more of a lead time in preparing to go online. Megan had noticed in, I think, early February that schools in Hong Kong, universities in Hong Kong, were starting to teach online with Zoom. And so she went up to the leadership, like in online open learning, and said, listen, I think we better start preparing. And so the leadership, again, exerting leadership, said, well, we don't know. I mean, it seems so distant, but just in case, let's start to prepare. So they actually started to prepare in earnest, not knowing whether any of that was going to be used or useful. But come mid-March, it was obvious that we had to go online, and we were prepared better than many institutions because, thanks to Megan, we knew what was going to happen. Okay, and so I saw the leadership get exerted in that way, and the leadership is not just directing everyone to let's do this, let's do that, but also to reach out to the students to make sure that the students are okay once we went online. We reached out to students once they went home, make sure that they're okay, they're healthy, and so forth. Okay? So I saw that leadership as well. So, and we wrote a small article that appeared as an opinion piece in Inside Higher Education. and also a longer article that expands on that and has also students' experience that will appear any moment now as a MIT faculty newsletter piece that Megan and I co-authored as well. Yeah. So just to finish up, I'd like to go back to OpenCourseware and that experience because it really did change my career and me as a person at MIT. Okay, so 20 years ago, Chuck Vest asked a small group of faculty members to come up with the online strategy for MIT. And what he had in mind was on MIT.com. This was still the .com era. And so we were going to create an MIT.com, take what professors produced and sell it and hopefully make some money. After 6 months of very carefully studying it, and Booz Allen Hamilton, a consulting firm, helped us to really crunch the numbers and do it right in ways that most faculty members don't know how to do. We came to the conclusion that MIT.com was not a good idea. There are a number of reasons, but one was that this is a very difficult business back 20 years ago. But we still had to propose something to President Vest. And so we sat around the table. I remember the last meeting, we were desperate. We knew that MIT.com was off the table. Okay, that would be really not a good thing for MIT to engage in. We had interviewed something like 60 organizations, okay, in detail, turned in the thickest report, according to President Vest, that a committee has ever turned in. But our proposal was a one sheet proposal in which we said, instead of trying to make money from educational content, let's do exactly the opposite. Let's turn it on its head and let's give it away for free that anyone can use. And that turned into OpenCourseware. And there, what I saw was a core value of MIT emerging, the core value of openness and generosity, and the desire to solve big problems of the world by bringing to bear what we produce at MIT. The mission statement of MIT, is that we generate, we preserve, and we share new knowledge and bring that to bear on the biggest problems of the world. Okay? And up until OpenCourseware, we fulfill that mission with research, basically. But now with OpenCourseware, we're able to fulfill that mission also with our teaching effort as well. But this core value that emerged there in that committee, I saw that and I was very moved by it. And there was also the leadership that emerged. Chuck Vest, we had no idea what Chuck will say. He may have just laughed it off and said, "Come on, guys, you can do better." He loved it. He loved it. He took it, and he raised funds for it. And he actually just moved it very forward very quickly. In fact, so fast that we were kind of surprised at how fast it was moving. We were not sure whether we should move that fast, but he did, and as a result, we changed the landscape of higher education with regard to educational content that we produce. We don't sell it; we give it away for free so that the rest of the world can benefit in the way that our students can benefit. Okay? So, core value in the case of OpenCourseware, the idea of openness, generosity, and wanting to bring to bear to the world the big problems of the world, things that we produce, and also leadership. Okay, I saw this then. I also saw this with the pandemic and going abruptly online. So. I'd be very happy to take your questions, but let me turn to Megan and have her tell you about her experience.
Hi guys, as I said, I'm Megan Purdue. I'm a digital learning fellow. I have a few slides I'm going to share. So I'm just going to share my screen. So I hope everyone can see that. So first I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Digital Learning Lab and what that is, and then kind of about this project and a little bit more about our findings. So the Digital Learning Lab is kind of a strange organization. Not many universities have a setup quite like this. So we function like each member of this lab sits within MIT departments, or in my case, I report to the Dean of the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences, SHAS. So we actually we report to the departments and schools where we work. So we're really embedded in the departments and schools, but the Digital Learning Lab is at Open Learning. So we're kind of this bridge between residential MIT education and open learning. We also create the bulk of the edX courses that are created. I think the Digital Learning Lab is responsible for 90% of the edX courses. At least that was the figure last year this time. So we kind of function as this like ambassadors for open learning among regular MIT faculty, because we know like intimately what kinds of projects are available, about how to get involved with making edX courses or like fancier OCW courses, and also what kinds of tools and projects are sort of available at Open Learning, and we can bring that to MIT faculty and also sort of identify promising projects or courses that we see and we could kind of develop. We're also subject matter experts, so most of the Digital Learning Lab, I would say maybe, I don't know, somewhere around 50%, I would say, have a PhD from the department that they work. So they actually come up through the department, then they decide to stay as professionals doing this work. So they're very deeply embedded in the culture of the department, also the academic discipline. Then we can become education experts through our focus on online learning and developing courses. And we work with MIT faculty to produce these courses and also tools, new things that we can bring back into the residential classes. So any course we're developing on edX, we're using those resources in the mirror class at MIT. So like the video content and the like tools and games that are created, that kind of thing. We also function as a community of practice, sort of sharing best practices between each other. And we also conduct research into online learning and pedagogy. Often we do this in groups together. So as a member of the Digital Learning Lab, during the transition, I felt like this was a really great opportunity for us to demonstrate our value to the university, because we had had so much experience in online education, which most of MIT really had not. Like there wasn't like a lot of schools have a strong tradition of teaching online. They already were doing that, but MIT really wasn't. It was a very residential campus for undergraduate and graduate education. So there weren't just like a lot of resources in the school of people who knew about how to teach online best. So I felt like this was a good time for us to step up and really help the faculty adjust to the transition. So I sort of like spearheaded a campaign of all of us, the Digital Learning Lab, training all of the MIT faculty to teach online in the weeks. So they had 2 weeks to prepare for the transition. And we really trained like the majority of the MIT faculty across the school. Like I know I did, I don't know, like many workshops because I did all of the SHAS faculty. I think it was like 10 departments or something. So it was a crazy time. So that's how I got connected with Shigeru, because I was so invested and so involved in his work, but also was really interested to know how the semester went. So it was great to get to talk to the faculty and do all these interviews after the spring semester was over and just kind of see what happened. So what we found was like faculty really talked about the transition in 3 ways, 2 of which we anticipated and 1 was a surprise. And this wasn't like individuals talked about it in one specific way or another. There was like people went back and forth, even with the same anecdote. They would reference like 1 or 2 of these kinds of perspectives. in a story. But the one was that this experience was a burden, and this is sort of characterized by this quote. The semester was terrible and I'm mourning the lost learning outcomes. So some people were saying we should have just canceled the semester. It was a disaster. We anticipated that, especially since it was such an abrupt transition and it was really so much work to be doing. We found other people talked about it as like a tolerable experience. It was reasonable, but not ideal. And we were surprised by how many talked about it as an opportunity. It turned out to be a much better experience than I thought. I would do more remote teaching in the future. And just to give you a perspective of sort of how this broke out across the faculty, this is a slide from the IR survey that Shigeru mentioned, which had a 53% response rate across the MIT faculty and instructors of the whole school. So it's a fairly sizable amount. But you can see in the green here is characterized this opportunity perspective, people that were pleased with the extent of student learning and also pleased with the quality of teaching they were able to provide. And that's really the vast majority of the faculty. We have some here in this gray in the middle, which I would characterize as the tolerable group. That was sort of okay, but not great. And then the ones who I would describe it as a burden were here in the purple. So it's interesting that really the majority of faculty felt, at least to some degree, that they were pleased with how the experience went and that they felt like it was an opportunity. And just to characterize how faculty were talking about teaching and learning with some quotes. In the burden group, they said, everything got scaled down and back, or the nature of my hands-on class does not work remotely. This is particularly for labs and things that really need to be done in person. Though I know in the fall, a lot of labs actually created lab kits that they mailed to students. So I think at least some of these classes were able to figure out a way to do it remotely with a little bit more time and resources. But I'm sure some of the labs were not able to, and that's not great. Ones that talked about it as tolerable said there's minimal deviation from the format used prior 10 years, so they were able to continue teaching the courses they always had. But the ones that talked about it as an opportunity really talked about how it forced them to be more creative. It opened up an enormous amount of innovation. Pedagogically, it was an exciting time. So Shigeru was saying, it was really an invitation for teachers to like rethink the way their subject was taught. I heard from a lot of faculty that they would just kind of went to the drawing board and said, what is it that I really want students to learn this semester? And kind of reformulated their semester based on that, which they thought was exciting and rewarding. In terms of engaging with students, this was something that a lot of faculty were really worried about how to sort of maintain a sense of community during while they're teaching online. So this is how they reported that it went. Some people described it being difficult engaging and motivating students, or had to work harder to keep students' focus and attention. Others said it did reduce personal interaction some, but it worked reasonably well. But then there was this other group that found real opportunity in engaging with students, like students who were ordinarily shy seemed to come out of their shell. It was much more relaxed than a usual sort of classroom. A lot of faculty talked about it being intimate, that they got to see where the students like lived. They got to know a lot more about the students than they normally would. They said there's a lot more interaction than we ever anticipated. Like a lot of faculty moved their office hours directly after class. So the students would just hang out and sort of informally chat with the faculty member, which was a huge innovation for them because most of them had really hardly ever had students show up for office hours before. So now they're suddenly having these regular long chats with their students about the subject. So then we're interested in what the long-term impact of this would be. I was particularly interested in that as a digital learning fellow. So I could say what the faculty were saying. As Shigeru was saying, they were very excited about this focus on teaching, which they a lot of them reported it was sort of the first time this had happened in their careers as faculty. Like this first quote, previously we had a faculty meeting every month and it was poorly attended. Now we have 30 members coming regularly and we discuss teaching. I think it's an amazing transformation that's happening, and the seriousness of my department takes teaching. So a lot of people were reporting that suddenly their colleagues in their departments were taking teaching more seriously than they ever had, as seriously as they took research prior. And this was very exciting and rewarding for faculty. Sort of to work with their colleagues and think about how to make their teaching better, how to make class more engaging, looking at educational research and seeing what it says and applying its sort of best practices. People say there are some things, sort of methods I've had to adapt that I will definitely keep when we're back in the traditional classroom. A lot of this was like small discussion, like breakout discussions. A lot of faculty reported that they tried doing this for the first time in their online classes because they wanted to get the students talking to each other. But this is something they had never done in their traditional classrooms. Was mostly lecture based or just the faculty kind of asking questions. So it's exciting to think about faculty bringing that back into the classroom when we get back on campus. And a lot of faculty we talked to said something along the lines of this last quote. I think we are on the cusp of a great new age of teaching, but we can screw it up. And I think what that faculty member, what that sort of sentiment is about is that a lot of the faculty are really hoping that we can harvest sort of these best practices and this excitement around teaching and really use it to make teaching better on campus and like perhaps bring more of a focus on teaching into sort of regular life at MIT as a faculty member. They're obviously concerned that this won't happen, but we'll see what happens.